Moscow's sky is steel grey, the kind of October morning where even the Kremlin's golden dome seems subdued. Cameras flash as the motorcade of Syrian interim President Ahmad al-Shara glides through the fortified gates. He is stepping into history and into a room where the weight of 2 decades of war, diplomacy and betrayal now converges. Inside the ornate hall, Russian President Vladimir Putin stands waiting, expression unreadable. When al-Shara enters, the two leaders shake hands firmly. The cameras capture the moment, a handshake between the man who replaced Bashar al-Assad and the man who, for years, had been Assad's strongest ally. For Moscow, it is a moment of quiet calculation. For Damascus, it may be a test of courage. Al-Shara's visit marks his first trip abroad since assuming Syria's interim presidency following the Transitional Council's decision to suspend Bashar al-Assad from power. The move, born out of mounting domestic pressure and international mediation, was seen as a turning point for a nation shattered by 14 years of conflict. But the shadows of the old regime still linger, and one name dominates every corridor of power: Assad. A senior Syrian official speaking to AFP has said that al-Shara's delegation intends to ask Moscow for the handover of the ousted leader, who is believed to be under Russian protection in an undisclosed location near Sochi. The request, sensitive and unprecedented, carries deep political risk. Russia has long shielded Assad from international prosecution and provided military backing that kept his government alive through the darkest years of the civil war. As the meeting begins, Putin's opening words are measured. Russia remains committed to Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, he says, but we also recognize the need for stability and reconciliation. His tone is calm, almost rehearsed, a reminder that for Moscow, influence in the Middle East is built on endurance, not emotion. Across the table, al-Shara listens carefully. At 52, he is a physician by training and a technocrat by temperament, a stark contrast to the authoritarian lineage of his predecessor. He leans forward slightly, nodding as interpreters whisper between them. "Mr. President," he says, "Syria is entering a new chapter. We want peace, accountability and reconstruction, but this cannot begin while the crimes of the past remain unaddressed." It is a direct, unambiguous appeal, one that cuts to the core of Russia's strategic dilemma. To hand over Assad would mean abandoning a longtime ally and signaling a retreat from years of geopolitical investment. But to refuse could alienate a new Syrian leadership that the West, including Washington and Brussels, has cautiously endorsed. Outside the Kremlin walls, the scene is tense. Protesters, a mix of Syrian expatriates and human rights activists, hold placards reading "Justice for Aleppo" and "No immunity for war crimes." The Russian police keep a strict cordon, but their chants echo faintly across Red Square. In Damascus, meanwhile, the streets are quieter, but the stakes are higher. For millions displaced or bereaved by the conflict, this meeting represents a moment of reckoning, however symbolic. Inside, the talks continue behind closed doors. Putin's advisors brief him on the implications of any move against Assad: Russia's military presence in Latakia, the Tartus naval base, the network of paramilitary contractors, all are tied to the old regime. The stability of our position in Syria depends on careful transition, one aide cautions. A sudden rupture could cost us everything we built since 2015. But al-Shara's team, backed by the Transitional Council in Damascus, has prepared its case meticulously. They argue that Syria's reconstruction and reintegration into the international system hinge on demonstrating accountability. Without addressing war crimes and chemical attack allegations, they say, there can be no normalization, not with the European Union, not with the Arab League, and certainly not with the United States. Reports suggest that al-Shara also brought a dossier, compiled by Syrian prosecutors, detailing evidence against former officials in Assad's inner circle. The inclusion of this file in his Moscow agenda sends a clear message. Syria's new leadership intends to break with its past, even if it means challenging the very power that helped sustain it. Journalists covering the visit describe an unusual stillness in the Kremlin corridors. Putin, they note, appears contemplative but cautious. The Russian president's public remarks have been brief, references to ongoing dialogue and shared interests in regional security. But analysts see a deeper strategic recalibration at play. Putin is balancing two fronts, says Elena Yermakova, a senior fellow at the Moscow Institute of Strategic Studies. He wants to maintain Russia's credibility as a mediator while avoiding the impression of betrayal toward Assad. The question is not whether he supports al-Shari's legitimacy, he does, but whether he is willing to let go of a symbol of Russian steadfastness. Meanwhile, in Ankara and Tehran, officials are watching closely. Turkey, which once hosted Syrian opposition groups, has signalled conditional support for the transitional government. Iran, on the other hand, views al-Shari's rise with suspicion, fearing that a pro-Western or even neutral Damascus could erode its regional influence. In Washington, the White House issued a cautious statement late Tuesday, welcoming constructive engagement between the Syrian interim leadership and international partners, including Russia-US officials privately admit they are watching for signs that Moscow might allow limited cooperation on post-conflict reconstruction, a potential bridge in an otherwise frozen relationship. Back in Moscow, the meeting stretches into its second hour. The cameras are long gone. Only interpreters, security aides, and note-takers remain. At one point, al-Shari reportedly slides a document across the table, an official request under international law for the extradition of Bashar al-Assad to face charges in Damascus. Putin reads it silently, sets it aside, and then looks up. This, he says after a pause, is not a simple matter, but we will consider it. The phrase is deliberately vague, diplomatic code for hesitation, yet the symbolism is undeniable. For the first time, Russia is publicly entertaining a discussion that would have been unthinkable even a year ago. Outside, as night falls over Moscow, the motorcade pulls away from the Kremlin. Al-Shari remains expressionless as journalists shout questions through the winter air. Did President Putin agree to extradite Assad? One asks. He doesn't answer, but his silence carries weight. Later, in a brief statement to the press, his spokesman says only, "We believe the conversation was frank and necessary. Syria is ready to turn the page. Analysts across the region are now parsing every word of that statement." Does turn the page mean justice or pragmatism? For many Syrians, it must mean both. The interim government faces enormous challenges, rebuilding cities reduced to rubble, resettling millions of refugees, and restoring institutions hollowed out by years of war. But none of these tasks can succeed, they argue, without addressing the question of accountability. At the United Nations in New York, diplomats are already preparing for the next round of Security Council debates on Syria. France and the United Kingdom are expected to press for renewed investigations into war crimes, while Russia may propose a framework for national reconciliation that avoids international prosecution. The tension between justice and geopolitics is once again on full display. As the news of the Moscow meeting spreads, reactions pour in from across the Arab world. In Cairo, the Arab League cautiously welcomes Syria's efforts toward national reconstruction. In Riyadh, officials stress the importance of inclusive dialogue. And in Beirut, the mood is more skeptical. "We've seen this theatre before," says one Lebanese analyst. "What matters is not the handshake, but the follow-through." For Russia, this encounter also carries global resonance. After years of Western isolation, Putin is repositioning Moscow as a power capable of mediating, not just intervening, in Middle Eastern affairs. Yet his motives remain layered. The Kremlin's long-term military access to the Mediterranean, its energy stakes in Syrian oil fields, and its leverage in any future reconstruction contracts. Still, the images from the meeting, the handshake, the solemn expressions, the gilded backdrop, tell their own story. Two men, two countries bound by history and conflict, confronting the ghosts of a war that redefined the Middle East. As the Kremlin lights dim, commentators on Russian state television frame the visit as proof of Moscow's enduring diplomatic relevance. Russia remains the anchor of regional stability, declares one presenter, but among Syrians watching from afar, the emotions are far more complex. Hope, skepticism, exhaustion, and a fragile belief that perhaps, finally, the era of impunity is ending. And so the day closes on a note of uncertainty. No extradition has been announced, no agreement signed, but a line has been crossed, from silence to dialogue, from denial to discussion. Whether that leads to justice or another frozen promise remains to be seen. For now, the world waits for the next statement, the next summit, the next signal from Moscow that might determine not just Assad's fate, but Syria's future.
Уважаемый господин президент России для Советского Союза времена, в 1944 году, и Россия всегда носили исключительно дружеский характер.